Hello, everybody. So this past week's Torah portion, Parsha, was Parsha Chukat, and a lot of very interesting lessons to learn and points to discuss. There's one particular point I want to go over, and so let's start. So a few pages into the Parsha, the Torah tells us that Moses had a sister called Miriam. Her name was Miriam, and a brother named Aharon. So Moses' sister passes away, she dies. And they say when she passed away, right, the verse later in the Torah says that the Jews start complaining about water. So the rabbis teach us that because Miriam was such a big tzaddiket, she was a righteous person, and she did such a big mitzvah in the past, that in her merit, the Jews for 40 years in the desert basically had it was a miracle. It was a rock, like I said in previous classes, there was a rock basically that followed them. That produced billions and billions of gallons of water for billions of people, for millions of people, for their animals. And so now the Jews start complaining. There's no water, and as soon as they're complaining, obviously who do they go to? They go to Moses, and they start complaining to Moses. There's no more water. And Moses and Aharon again are like, oh my gosh, with these complaints, what's going on? They go to pray to God. They say, God, please help us. So God tells them, okay, they're justified. They want water. You know what? Here, I'll tell you exactly what to do. Go to the rock. Go to that specific rock that produces that billions of gallons of water, that miracle rock, and speak to the rock. Speak to the rock, and speak to the rock for it to bring water. So now, Moses and Aharon, they go to the rock, and God told them to do it in front of the entire Jewish people. They're in front of the entire Jewish people. And what happened was that some Jews start saying, "Oh, why do you have to bring out water from this rock? This rock that obviously we know you can bring out water from this rock. It's not such a big miracle, it's been going on for 40 years while we were in the desert. Why, then there's another rock next to him. He's like, okay, make the water. Everyone said, make the water come from this other rock. And Moshe, on his level, whatever, obviously we can't understand this, but he got upset at them. He got upset, and instead of speaking to the rock, he called the Jews, he called the Bnei Israel, the Jewish people, he called them rebels, and then instead of speaking to the rock like God said, and that specific rock, he didn't listen to God. He ended up hitting another rock. Why? What was his mindset? His mindset was, listen, I gotta right now defend God. They only think God can make a miracle from this rock because it already has special powers. I want to show them it doesn't matter which rock it is. God's infinite. God could do any, make miracles from any rock. So he listened to them, and he hits another. He basically the rock next to it. He hit another rock and poured gushing billions of gallons of water came out of it. Okay. Now, right after that whole story, so Moshe says, okay, he's like, okay, I got to defend God. He hit the rock. Everyone got water at the end of the day. God tells Moses and Aharon, because you guys didn't listen to me, because of this, you guys are not going into Israel. Now imagine Moshe, what Moshe was feeling, Moses. He literally, for 40 years, he took the Jews out of Egypt. He went, through the plagues, putting his life at risk, going to Pharaoh, and then going through the desert, and then getting the Torah, and then, just teaching the Jews for 40 years Torah, so much sacrifice. And a few times God wanted to wipe out the Jews, and Moses said, God, take me out, don't take the Jews out. He did so much for the Jewish people, and Moses, his biggest dream was to go to Israel, to go to Israel, conquer the land. There's certain mitzvahs, commandments that you can only do in Israel and not outside of Israel. Moses wanted to do every commandment, so he was dying to go to Israel, and be able to serve God in Israel. And now God is telling, basically, in a sense, smacking him in the face and you can't go into Israel. Your biggest dream, I'm not letting you do it. And now that's a tragedy. Moses, the biggest thing you want to do, God said you can't do it anymore. Now the question is, obviously the story where, we could look at it from our level, but we can't judge, Moses, him getting upset at the Jews and thing. It's obviously we're not on the same level to judge him, and I'm not coming from that perspective of I know better and I'm saying judging Moses. I'm not coming from that perspective. My perspective is, what did Moshe do so wrong? I'm not going to call him, I'm going to say Moses, easier to say it. I'm going to say Moshe instead of Moses. What did Moshe do wrong? What did he do? He literally, his calculation was, I want to, make God, I want to do Kiddush Hashem. I want to make God look good. They think God could only make water come out of this rock. I showed them that the water could come out from any rock. It doesn't matter. God's infinite. So what did Moses do that was so bad that basically God told him that you did such a big sin that I'm not letting you into Israel. I'm not letting you to fulfill your dream. And the answer is, the Torah tells us in the verses. It says, what was Moses' sin? You failed to sanctify my name. You failed to do Kiddush Hashem. Meaning what? You did Chilul Hashem. You desecrated my name. You didn't listen to me. I know you had your calculation, but I told you to do this. I told you to speak to the rock and speak to this particular rock, but you chose to not listen to me. And yeah, you had your own calculations. You're doing it for my benefit. You want to represent my name and show. God's telling Moses and show everybody that I'm infinite. But you didn't listen to me. And not only that, you did not listen to me, and you were by yourself. You did it in front of so many people, and the entire Jewish people there. That's called Chilul Hashem. It's when you desecrate God's name in public. So that was the sin of Moses. That was the big sin he did. Again, obviously on his level, not for us to judge anything, but I'm saying that was the sin he did, that God, because of that sin, God didn't let him into Israel. Now, I want to talk about this idea of Chilul Hashem, desecrating God's name. What is Chilul Hashem? So I kind of said it before. Chilul Hashem is basically God, he gives us rules. He gives us commandments. He gives us things to do. Things, he gives us a purpose and things we need to do to get to that ultimate mission and purpose. Yeah? So now, when we don't listen to God and we don't do what he says, that's called Chilul Hashem. You're desecrating God's name. God wants us to be, for example, the Jewish people, we're supposed to be a light unto the nations. We're supposed to be a people of morality, a people of ethics. And the ultimate ethics and morality is the Torah. To live by the Torah mitzvah, that's the ultimate morality. That's the ultimate good and bad. God gave us that. So now God gave us the rules of what's good and what's bad. When we keep those rules and we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, and especially we do it in public, that's called Kiddush Hashem. You sanctify God's name. When you listen to God, you keep kosher, you keep Shabbat, you put on tefillin, right? Or, for example, you don't speak bad about people, you don't treat people in business, you're very nice to people, you don't speak in a harsh tone to people, you don't, you respect everybody, you say thank you, you're polite in public. That's Kiddush Hashem, right? And Chilul Hashem is the opposite. You're not keeping, if someone doesn't keep Shabbat, it's Chilul Hashem. That's desecrating Hashem's name. You're making Hashem look bad, in a sense. You're making God look bad. You represent God, whether you're wearing a kippah or not. You represent God. You're a Jew. And you make, like if someone's, when people see God, people are not keeping Shabbat, it gets to the morale. Wow, look, these people are not listening to God. God commanded to do that. Or keeping kosher, or eating at a non-kosher restaurant. People see, wow, look, this Jewish guy, he's eating in a non-kosher restaurant, Or, for example, you speaking polite to people, or being rude, or being unappreciative, or being, or just being a mess, driving recklessly, all these things, that's Chilul Hashem. That when people see us doing those things, they're like, what the heck? These people are supposed to be the God squad. They're supposed to be representing God, and they're acting in an immoral fashion. That's Chilul Hashem. Now, there's two types of Kiddush Hashem. There's two types of Chilul Hashem and Kiddush Hashem. There's Chilul Hashem between Jews and non-Jews, and Chilul Hashem between Jews and Jews. So let me explain Jews and non-Jews. Chilul Hashem between Jews and non-Jews. People think, Chilul Hashem is only with Jews. It doesn't have to do with non-Jews. Absolutely not true. Chilul Hashem has to do with non-Jews also. For example, I'm a Jewish guy. I have for example, I'm driving in the street and I'm wearing kippah. Look, I'm dressed in, they see I'm religious. They see I'm wearing a yarmulke, and I go in the street and I cut somebody off, right? Or I jaywalk and I stop somebody, in a bad way, and they start beeping at me. They're like, what are you doing? Get out of the street, You almost got hit, but I'm like, I don't care. I'll do whatever I want, Or you playing basketball, at a certain park, and there's non-Jews playing with you, and Jews can't hide that they're Jewish. Every Jew looks Jewish. Everyone knows. Everyone knows you're Jew. Whether you're wearing a yarmulke or not, whether you're dressed black or white or not, somehow they'll know you're Jewish. You can't escape the fact. Whether you're the most not religious Jew possible, they'll know you're Jewish at the end. And when you play, let's say, for example, with these people at the park, and you curse, and you're aggressive, and you foul people, and you don't say sorry after, and you're so whatever, what happens? These non-Jews say, wow, look at the Jewish people. They're such bad people. They're such horrible people. they're so mean, they're so bad, they have such bad character traits. What kind of nation is this? And makes them look down on Judaism. And we have a mitzvah to teach them to get close to God, to keep the 7 laws of Noah. They also have a mission. And we basically make them think like, wow, what kind of these people are the chosen people. These people have that responsibility of being the chosen people. Who are they? And they look down upon us. And what do you mean? Maybe it was just one Jewish guy who was acting bad. Why does it have to do with the rest of the Jewish people? But the same idea is that racism, or just judging people, for example, let's say there's a certain type of race, certain type of person, who has the classic, characteristics of, like, let's say you're walking it's 12 at night, you're walking in the street, and there's a certain person walking behind you at whatever. And sometimes, you're walking and you're getting scared of that person based off their race, based off their, whatever. And because of that, and it's 12 o'clock at night, you're scared and you keep looking behind you. Maybe that guy's going to, let's say you're in, in a dangerous area and you keep, but why do we look? Maybe the guy's innocent. Maybe the guy didn't do anything wrong. Why do you have to be racist? Why do you have to judge this person and assume this guy's like that? The problem is, because a few people from that race did something like that, now everybody assumes that entire race is bad. I can't trust anybody from that race, and that's why they're scared. Why? Because people, they don't understand there's good people and there's bad people. Just because someone's this type of ethnicity, someone looks like this, just because someone dresses in a certain way, doesn't mean everybody who dresses like that is in that way, right? It could be a good indicator for example, if someone's wearing tattoos all over himself, he looks like a gang member, and you're walking the street, okay, yeah, maybe you can make that assumption. But generally speaking, there's people, I'm saying that in a sense, they make these kind of judgments, and they assume everybody, from that particular race is like that, and obviously it's totally wrong, and that's totally uncalled for. But the idea is that you see some people acting like in a bad way, you assume everybody else is like that, So like the doctor example, you see one doctor act bad, then you think, oh, all doctors are bad. Or I said the example from before, like you see one rabbi who calls himself a rabbi, whatever, and he's acting bad, and then everyone assumes all rabbis are bad, even though that's not true. What does this guy have connection with everybody else? Same thing with the Jewish people. If one Jew acts bad, whether he's religious, whether he's not religious, it goes and it reflects on the entire Jewish people. No matter what, it reflects on them. You can't control it. You're representing the Jewish people no matter what. So that's the idea between Jews and non-Jews of Chilul Hashem. And the idea is maybe that non-Jewish person, never know. Let's say, for example, you have a worker who works for you and he's non-Jewish, and you were very mean to them, you're disrespectful to them. You never know. Maybe that guy one day, will become maybe he'll become a political figure, or his kids will be in politics. And now they have to determine a law, or to help Israel, or, whatever it is. And because you acted in a negative way towards him, now he's going to be like, you know what? I don't like the Jewish people, Or in the other sense, if you act good towards him, he's going to be like, I want to help the Jewish people. So that's key. So Chilul Hashem, that's in regards to Jew and non-Jew. When we, if God forbid, disrespect non-Jews, not treat them, and they look at us and be like, what the heck? Now, Chilul Hashem between Jew and Jew is kind of the same idea. The idea is what? It's between me and another Jew. For example, let's say I look like a religious Jew, I'm wearing a black velvet kippah. I'm dressed in, black and white, right? And now I'm supposed to be, I'm representing God. I'm supposed to be a moral person, yeah? So if I walk on the street, all eyes are on me. No matter what I do, the way I speak, the way I talk, if I have a little stain on my shirt, whatever it is, everyone is looking at you. Everyone is looking, wow, this guy's representing God. Like, what is he going to do next? That's why you see on the news a lot of times, there's crimes going on from all different types of religions and sects. But it's always when, a Jew does something, especially an Orthodox Jew, let's say, for example, makes a mistake or does something wrong, he's always the one on the front of the newspaper. They're always talking about him. Why? Because, you're Orthodox. You're representing God. You're religious. You should be better than that. That's why people make such a big deal. So imagine an Orthodox Jew, a religious Jew, whatever, and he doesn't act so religious. One of my relatives, he works for a certain industry, and in that industry, he sees a certain Jew, calling himself religious, lie through his teeth, on doing business deals, and doing all these scams and these different things, whatever, different things that are immoral and not ethically correct, work-wise. And the guy, the next second after he makes that phone call, he goes and he prays mincha, and he prays and he davens and he learns Torah every day and whatever. And my cousin told me he was a little bit less religious. He's like, listen, I'm very confused. How can this guy be so religious in one aspect and in another aspect be so not religious. Like, it doesn't make sense. And I told, it's a contradiction. And I said, listen, if I told you there's a Jew who eats pork, would you say this Jew is religious? You say, no, he eats pork. Okay, so too the Jew who steals in business. So too the Jew steals. Just like eating pork is a sin, stealing, disrespecting people, getting angry, that's also a sin. Those are both sins. And to be a good Jew, you have to be good between God and between other people. You have to keep Shabbat, keep kosher. Those are the mitzvahs, ben adam lamakom, between us and God, and ben adam l'chavero, mitzvahs between us and other people. Not stealing, not being bad to people, being nice to people, giving charity. If you're only good with other people, but you're not good with God, right? You give so much charity, but and you don't keep Shabbat, it's a problem. Or if you keep Shabbat and you keep kosher and you keep everything, but you're still in business, you're mean to people, that's a problem. You need both. You need to keep the mitzvahs between us and God and us and other people, to be a good person. So I was explaining that idea to him. But you know what? This guy, he doesn't know his effect. He's a religious guy, and now people look at him and they see how he acts, and they're like, wow, why should I be religious? Why should I get close to God? I said the word religious means being close to God. Why should I, follow Torah and mitzvot and go in that lifestyle if I see someone who calls himself religious, acts in a not moral manner? The Torah, like they say, wow, what a waste of Torah. Torah doesn't make you better, So the idea is what? That we don't, Chil Hashem is so far-fetched, such a severe act, like sin, that you never know. Because of you, I'm saying in the sense of like let's say a religious person. Because of you, because someone doesn't want to get close to God, and they might never study Torah or learn or go or take steps to get close to God because you did something wrong, because you were acting in an immoral way, you were being mean, you were cursing, you were this, you didn't act with manners, whatever it is, right? So this is the idea of Chil Hashem. So Chil Hashem between Jews and non-Jews, and Chil between Jews and Jews. Now, I want to show you, now that we understand that, the definitions, the categories of Chil Hashem, I want to show you how severe Chil Hashem is from the halachic perspective. So we say there's 4 categories. Let's say somebody did a sin, right? There's 4 categories of things they could violate, right? Things they could do and things they cannot do. Now, the 4 categories, and Rambam and the Gemara in Yuma brings it down. These categories of how to make repentance for these things. So I'll tell you the categories. So in the lowest level category is positive commandments. For example, to eat matzah, to put on tefillin, to pray, to say Shema in the morning and say it at night. Right? Those are positive commandments. Now, positive commandments. If someone, for example, doesn't do a positive commandment, they, for example, they missed tefillin, or they missed Shema, or they missed a prayer, right? How do you do teshuvah for a positive commandment? You basically, it's called the teshuvah statement. You admit the sin, you regret the sin, and you stop doing the sin. So, for example, let's say someone, didn't eat matzah, or didn't say Shema in the morning. He didn't say or he didn't say before he went to sleep, right? He said it at night. So he says, okay, God, I admit the sin of saying Shema or not praying. I admit the sin. I regret the sin, right? I'm so sorry, I'm embarrassed, I'm ashamed. If I could go back, I wouldn't do it again. So that's regret. And I'm going to work my best never to do the sin again. They say, the Torah says, on the second he moves from his spot, meaning right away, he's forgiven for his sin. So if the guy, he's 80 years old and he missed tefillin for the rest of his whole life, he didn't put since his bar mitzvah, he gets forgiven on the spot. As long as he starts obviously putting on tefillin every day starting after that. But obviously you missed the reward of 80 years that you can never get back. Right? So that's for positive commandments. So how do you do teshuvah for positive commandments? Teshuvah statement. So those 3 things: admit, regret, stop doing the sin. Okay, that's category number 1. Then there's a category more severe than that. That's a little bit harder to do teshuvah for that category. That's what? Negative commandments. Negative commandments are, for example, someone eating non-kosher meat, someone eating non-kosher fish, eating non-kosher sushi restaurants, not non-kosher dairy, meat and dairy together, shaving with a razor, speaking bad about people, lashon hara, cutting the sideburns too short here, going in the peot, that area, cutting here the side locks, the sideburns, whatever, different negative commandments. Yeah. So a person who violates a negative commandment, now it's not enough to do teshuvah statement. Teshuvah statement only pushes off the punishment. But what erases the sin, that when a person leaves this world, he's not going to have that sin in his account anymore? Yom Kippur. So he needs teshuvah statement, so he needs to admit, regret, stop doing the sin. And then once Yom Kippur comes, boom, the sin is wiped out. You need those 2. So positive commandments, you just need teshuvah statement, right? Negative commandments, you need teshuvah statement plus Yom Kippur. Then you have a category more severe than that called karet. Karet means cut off. There's sins that are so bad so detrimental that if a person does these sins, they cut themselves off from Judaism in a sense, meaning they lose there's a few meanings of that. Meaning they either lose their heaven, they lose their olam haba, they're cut off from the next world. God forbid, they're cut off from their lifespan. Instead of living to 100 years old, they die younger. Okay? And God forbid, their kids dying young. Chas v'shalom, God forbid. So the idea is what? That's what karet is. So now with karet, what are examples of karet? Karet could be, for example, all the sexual crimes, family, relatives, stuff like that. They're very intense things, bestiality, homosexuality, or stuff like, which might not compared to what I just said, like eating chametz on Pesach, eating bread and all that stuff, leavening on Pesach, that's karet. Eating on Yom Kippur is karet. Breaking Shabbat, violating Shabbat, violating the 39 malachot, 39 categories of things you can't do on Shabbat, that's karet also. Or, for example, eating a certain part of, non-kosher meat, there's the specific fats that you can't eat in non-kosher meat. That's why it's a problem to eat non-kosher meat. It could be karet. Drinking blood or whatever, certain just different categories. There's 36 categories of karet. I'm not going to go into all, or doing idol worship, not believing God, whatever, certain stuff like that. So now, for karet, how does a person do teshuvah for karet? So, and another karet is nida, going with a girl who had her menstrual cycle and didn't wait the 7-day period and go in a mikveh, right? That's basically with most unmarried women. That would be and even married women, that would be a problem because they have to go to the mikveh, and it doesn't matter once their menstrual cycle, their period is done, they still have to go and dip in this natural body of water. There's a lot of halacha with that, so ask your local Orthodox rabbi for more details. So I'm not going to say that, but I'm not going to go over all those things. But the idea is what? Those are karet. They're so severe that a person gets cut off if he does them. If he has relations, for example, with Anita, like I said, just if I wasn't clear enough. So now, what does a person do for karet? He has to do teshuvah statement and Yom Kippur. Those don't clean the sin. That only holds off the punishment. What erases the sin? Suffering, yisurin. What's suffering? Suffering, there's two types of suffering. Positive suffering and negative suffering. So let's say negative suffering. What's negative suffering? God forbid, losing money, getting injured, getting in a car accident, going through hard things, whatever problems, all type of problems, all type of sicknesses. That's negative suffering. So if a person, for example, did a karet knowingly, I'm not talking about someone who doesn't know or whatever. I'm talking about someone knowingly violates a karet. He eats chametz on Pesach, he eats on Yom Kippur, or whatever. He has to do his teshuvah it's not enough to do admit, regret, and stop doing it in Yom Kippur. He needs to get suffering for it. So that's negative suffering. But God is merciful. He gives us the option of choosing between negative suffering and positive suffering. So negative suffering is those things I said, car accidents, whatever, losing money, whatever. Positive suffering, though, is, for example, it's very hard for you to sit down and learn Torah, So you push yourself to sit and it was hard for you. You get a little bit suffering. It's hard. Or you wake up early in the morning to go pray. You're tired. You want to go to sleep. Or, for example, you give charity. You work so many hours to make let's say to make a lot of money, and that time and energy spent to make that money, you give that to charity. That's in a sense that was suffering. You suffer and you give that money to charity, whatever, right? So the idea is what? That you could do mitzvot, and you could do you could get positive suffering or negative suffering. So negative suffering is the negative stuff. Positive suffering is what I said. So a person could choose. He doesn't have to get negative suffering. He could choose to get positive suffering, but it's all up to the person. So for karet, if someone violates a karet, the 36 karet, one of the 36, he has to do teshuvah statement, Yom Kippur, and get suffering. That's how severe it is. Now, if that wasn't bad enough, how severe karet is, there's something worse. The worst sin that those three things, teshuvah statement, Yom Kippur, and suffering, don't erase. And what's the sin? Chilul Hashem, desecrating God's name. It's such a bad sin that those three things, teshuvah statement, Yom Kippur, and suffering, doesn't erase. What erases it? The day of death, when a person dies. That's the only way to erase it, when a person dies. That's how severe Chilul Hashem is. That's to show you what we see from how intense the teshuvah is, the repentance is to make for. We see how severe the sin is. So if positive, negative commandments, eating pork, wow, eating pork, oh wow, eating chametz on Pesach, wow, it's such a severe. Chilul Hashem is to do teshuvah for that is much harder, much harder. So how do you do teshuvah for Chilul Hashem? Obviously, you have to do all those three things. Even with even though those things don't erase it, it does erase it in a sense. You still have to do them. You need to do, even for Chilul Hashem, even for Karet, you have to admit Yom Kippur and thing, but in suffering. But you also need extra things to do. So for Chilul Hashem, it's so bad. The only way to fix Chilul Hashem and desecrating God's name is to do Kiddush Hashem. When you sanctify God's name, when you do good actions, and when you for example, like let's say you're, like I said, you're a bad driver, you made a lot of people go away from the religion, you talk bad about rabbis, stuff that brings Judaism down and makes people look Judaism in a negative way. Now, for example, you do the opposite. You prove to people God exists, you prove to people Torah is from God, you do things that make people want to get close to God. You're a mensch, you act with such good character traits, you dress nicely, people look at you and be like, wow, like I want to be religious, or you do such great acts of kindness that people are like, wow, that's Kiddush Hashem, especially when you do it in public. So now we understand the whole idea. So we understand why, based off all the things I tell you, why Moshe's action, Moshe's sin was so bad, because he did Chilul Hashem. Obviously, on his level, it's different than the way we do it. But the idea is what? That it's such a severe sin that even the greatest person, he had to get, like instead of God punishing him in the next world, God gave him his punishment in this world, and took it away. And instead, he didn't have to deal with the consequence in the next world, right? Because every commandment that we don't do, right, of the 4 categories I mentioned, we have to, there's reward and punishment, there's consequence for our actions. Either we deal with it in this world or the next world, So the idea is what? That Chilul Hashem is such a severe sin. And I want to tell you a story. The story goes as follows. There's basically, around the time of the Holocaust, there was a big, there was a big debate between, the people, the high-ranking officials in the American government, whether or not to accept Jews from Germany to come to America. And there's basically boats filled with, hundreds of thousands of people, filled in many boats to come to America. And they're trying to decide, should we let the Jews in or not? Should we let these Jews in? So it was a big debate. A lot of people didn't want to, whatever. One high-ranking, I don't know if it was the president. I think the story, I forgot if it was the president or not, but it was one high-ranking government official, and it was on him to make the decision. And they asked him, like, what should we do? I think it was the president. So let's assume it was the president. Might be wrong, but they asked him, should we let the Jews in or not? And you know what the president said? This high-ranking official, he said, the Jewish people, I have two Jewish people working for me. These people are the most unbelievable people. The way they speak, the way they act, the way they talk, the way they work, how honest they are. Not one lie comes out of their mouth, not one curse word. These are the Jewish people. I want as many of these people in my country as possible. And because of that, those two guys, they, obviously they probably found out that they were the reason that happened eventually. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But the point is that hundreds of thousands of Jews were saved from the gas chambers of Auschwitz and all these horrible things that Hitler was trying to do in Germany. Saved, their lives were saved. Why? Because of two Jews. They acted good and they were they're Kiddush Hashem. They were sanctifying God's name. They acted in a correct moral way, and because of that, hundreds of the Jews got saved. So the point I'm trying to say, what's the takeaway from the story? You never know the ripple effect of your actions, for the good and for the bad. If you do Kiddush Hashem, you never knew. Maybe thousands of Jews will be saved one day. Maybe people will come back to Judaism because of you, and instead of missing out on the purpose of life, they come closer to you. But on the opposite scale, if you're not acting in a moral way, and here's the takeaway from everything: if you're not acting in a moral way, you lie, you cheat, you scam people. Every word out of your mouth is a curse word. You play basketball in a park, and I'm just giving an example because this is what I saw recently. And you're aggressive, and you put people down. You make fun of people. You're trying to argue with people, and you're not respectable, and just so many different things, so many different negative things that probably we all ourselves have seen in our lives, or you dress in a bad way, your breath smelling bad, you don't take a shower, that's Chilul Hashem. People look at you and be like, whoa, what is it? What is this guy? Whatever it is, let's say you do all these things, but you're just a negative person, you always speak bad about people, or you cut people off when you're driving. How many people drive, they beep, whatever it is, right? And people look at them like, what are you doing, Whatever it is, especially in business, by the way, treating people, or your workers, whoever it is, whether it's your workers, whether it's your family members, whether it's people it doesn't matter, it could be your housekeeper, it doesn't matter. Treat everybody with respect. Remember that if you don't do Kiddush Hashem, you're not sanctifying God's name, you're doing Chilul Hashem. And it's so detrimental, you could lose everything. You could lose your connection with God, you could lose all the things you've been working for. Why? Because you desecrate God's name, because you make people look bad. You make Judaism look bad. That's what Chil Hashem is. And obviously, we shouldn't judge Judaism by the Jews. Judaism is perfect. The Torah is perfect. The Jews might not be perfect. We're working on ourselves. We're trying to get there, but Judaism is perfect. The Torah is perfect. But we shouldn't judge Judaism by the Jew. But remember, we might know that, but most people don't know that. They're going to judge Judaism by the Jews. So make sure that whatever you do, you would live as the best Jew possible, the most moral person, and ask yourself before you do any action, is what I'm doing right? Is what I'm doing wrong? I wish I could give every example, because sometimes people, like they need all the examples to, when that case comes, they remember it because they heard in a speech that example. But I can't give every example possible. It's not. There's so many cases. But once you understand the idea and the formula, the general principle, then any case that comes up, just try apply it, and you'll know whenever a case comes up, whether you're doing Kiddush Hashem, where you're sanctifying God's name, you make people want to get closer to God and closer to Judaism, or whether you're doing the opposite, God forbid, you're doing Chil Hashem. So Bezrat Hashem, let all our actions be Kiddush Hashem and not Chil Hashem, and may we all get closer to God and bring other people closer to God. Thank you for listening.